I never thought a propane tank would land someone in jail, but here we are. And honestly, I am still processing the entire insane chain of events that unfolded in my peaceful suburban neighborhood in Gilbert, Arizona. My name is Aaron Kellerman, and I had lived in the Sunset Ridge HOA community for about 3 years when this nightmare started. I am a software developer who works from home, which means I spend a lot of time in my backyard, grilling and unwinding after long days of staring at code. My pride and joy was my outdoor kitchen setup, complete with a top-of-the-line grill that ran on a massive commercial-grade propane tank. This was not your typical 20-pound tank from the hardware store. This was a 100-pound beast that cost me $400 to fill and lasted me nearly 6 months of regular grilling. The HOA in Sunset Ridge had always been a bit strict, but manageable. We had the usual rules about lawn maintenance, paint colors, and holiday decorations. Nothing too crazy, or at least that is what I thought until Brenda Patterson took over as the HOA president 6 months ago. Brenda was 52 years old, had that signature haircut that screamed manager summoning authority, and treated the HOA bylaws like they were constitutional amendments. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a license plate that read HOA, which should have been my first warning sign. The problem started on a Tuesday morning in late September. I was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping coffee and reviewing some code when my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Brenda standing there with her clipboard, wearing a beige pantsuit despite the Arizona heat still hovering around 90 degrees. "Aaron," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "we need to discuss your propane tank." I blinked at her. "My propane tank?" "Yes. It is in violation of the HOA guidelines. Section 12, subsection 4 clearly states that all utility equipment must be properly screened from view. Your tank is visible from the street if someone walks to the corner of Maple and turns their head at a 45-degree angle." I stared at her, trying to process if she was serious. "Brenda, my tank is in my backyard behind a 6-foot fence. You would have to actively try to see it." She tapped her pen against her clipboard. "Nevertheless, it is visible, and that constitutes a violation. You have 2 weeks to remedy the situation or face a fine of $50 per day." "That is insane," I said, feeling my blood pressure rising. "The tank weighs over 100 pounds when full, and it is safely positioned exactly where the gas company installed it. Moving it would require professional help and probably cost me $1,000. Brenda gave me that tight-lipped smile that I had come to despise. "Those are the rules, Aaron. Everyone must follow them equally. Good day." She turned on her heel and walked back to her Lexus, leaving me standing in my doorway, utterly bewildered. I spent the next hour reading through the entire HOA bylaws document, which was 87 pages of the most tedious legalese I had ever encountered. Nowhere did I find anything that specifically addressed propane tanks. Section 12, subsection 4 talked about utility meters and air conditioning units, but propane tanks were not mentioned at all. I fired off an email to Brenda pointing this out, along with photos showing that my tank was barely visible even if you deliberately tried to see it. She responded within 10 minutes, saying that propane tanks fell under utility equipment, and the interpretation of the rules was at the discretion of the HOA board. She copied the other 2 board members, Patricia something and Doug something, who I had never actually met. The 2-week deadline came and went. I refused to move the tank on principle, and sure enough, I started receiving daily fines of $50. The notices came via certified mail, each one more threatening than the last. By the end of the first week of October, I had racked up $350 in fines, that I had no intention of paying. That is when things escalated in a way I never could have predicted. On October 8th, I came home from a rare in-person meeting at my company's office in Phoenix to find my backyard gate slightly ajar. My stomach dropped. I always kept that gate locked because I had expensive equipment back there, not just the grill but also my patio furniture and a high-end smoker. I rushed through the gate and stopped dead in my tracks. The propane tank was gone, just gone. The space where it had sat for 3 years was empty except for some disturbed gravel and the disconnected gas line that now terminated in nothing. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Had someone stolen it? Who steals a 100-pound propane tank? The thing was enormous and unwieldy. This was not some crime of opportunity by a random thief. I immediately called the Gilbert Police Department. An officer named Rodriguez arrived about 20 minutes later. He was in his early 30s, professional, and took notes as I explained the situation. "So this tank, how much was it worth?" he asked. The tank itself was about $200, but it had probably $300 worth of propane in it, so we are looking at $500 total. And you are sure it was locked in your backyard? Absolutely. The gate was locked this morning when I left. Someone had to have opened it. Officer Rodriguez walked around my backyard, examining the area where the tank had been. No damage to the lock, no signs of forced entry. You give anyone else a key to this gate? No one, just me, he nodded slowly. Tell me about this HOA dispute you mentioned. I explained the entire situation with Brenda, the fines, and her insistence that I move the tank. Rodriguez's expression shifted from neutral to interested. So the HOA president wanted you to move this specific item, and now it is missing, he said. That is quite a coincidence. You think she took it? I am not accusing anyone of anything yet, but I will definitely want to speak with her. Do you have her contact information? I gave him Brenda's phone number and address. She lived just 4 streets over in the same development, in one of the larger homes with the premium lot size. Rodriguez said he would follow up and told me to contact my insurance company about the theft. After he left, I sat on my back patio, staring at the empty space and feeling a mixture of anger and disbelief. If Brenda had actually stolen my propane tank to enforce her insane interpretation of HOA rules, that was not just petty tyranny anymore. That was actual theft, a crime. But I had no proof, and I knew she would just deny everything. That is when I remembered something that made my heart race. About 6 months ago, after reading one too many stories online about stolen trailers and equipment, I had purchased a small GPS tracker from Amazon. It was one of those compact devices marketed for tracking vehicles, boats, and valuable equipment. I had attached it to my propane tank with industrial-strength adhesive and basically forgotten about it because, well, who steals a propane tank? I grabbed my phone and opened the tracking app. It took a few seconds to load, and then a map appeared on my screen with a blinking blue dot. The tracker was active, and according to the app, my propane tank was currently located at 1847 Sunset Ridge Drive. That was Brenda's address. My hands were actually shaking as I stared at the screen. She had really done it. The HOA president had stolen my property because I refused to comply with her made-up rule interpretation. This was beyond anything I could have imagined, even from someone as controlling as Brenda. I immediately called Officer Rodriguez back. He answered on the second ring. "Officer Rodriguez, this is Aaron Kellerman. I have some new information about my stolen propane tank. I am listening." I had a GPS tracker attached to it. I just checked the app and the tank is at 1847 Sunset Ridge Drive. That is Brenda Patterson's house. There was a pause. You are absolutely certain about this? Yes. The tracker is active and updating in real time. It has been at that location for the past 2 hours. Do not go over there, Rodriguez said firmly. I will handle this. I am going to need you to send me screenshots of that tracking information and any documentation you have about purchasing the tracker. I can do that right now. Good. Sit tight. I will call you back. I sent him everything he requested, then sat in my living room, watching the GPS app like it was the most riveting television show ever made. The blue dot did not move. My propane tank was just sitting in Brenda's yard, apparently, like this was completely normal behavior. About 45 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Rodriguez. Mr. Kellerman, I am at Miss Patterson's residence now. We found your propane tank in her backyard. She claims she was having it moved to a storage facility for your own benefit to help you comply with HOA regulations. I explained that removing someone's property without permission constitutes theft, regardless of her intentions. She is being arrested. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with sheer disbelief. She is actually getting arrested. Yes, sir. Given the value of the stolen property and the GPS evidence, we have probable cause. She will be booked and can post bail, but there will be charges. I will need you to come down to the station to give a formal statement and retrieve your property. I will be there in 20 minutes. I drove to the Gilbert Police Department in a daze. This felt surreal, like I had somehow fallen into a bizarre alternate reality where HOA presidents thought they could just steal people's stuff. At the station, Rodriguez took me through the process of filing a formal police report and recovering my property. He mentioned that Brenda had been combative during her arrest, insisting that she had authority under HOA rules to remove violations from properties. She kept saying she had every right to do what she did, Rodriguez told me. Her lawyer is going to have a tough time with that defense. Can I actually get the tank back today? I asked. It is evidence right now, but given the GPS tracker and her admission that she took it, we can release it to you pretty quickly. Give us a couple of days to photograph everything and process the evidence, then you can pick it up. I thanked him and headed home, my mind reeling. That evening, I received a text message from my neighbor Mike, who lived 2 houses down. Dude, did Brenda really get arrested for stealing your propane tank? The neighborhood Facebook group is going insane. I had forgotten about the Sunset Ridge Community Facebook group, which I had muted months ago, because it was just constant complaints about people parking on the street and debates about what constituted an appropriate holiday decoration. I unmuted it and found over 200 comments on a post from someone who had apparently witnessed Brenda being led to a police car in handcuffs. The comments were split between people who thought this was hilarious karma for Brenda's tyrannical HOA presidency and Brenda's defenders, who insisted there must be some misunderstanding and that she was only trying to help maintain property values. A few people were demanding to know the full story, so I posted a brief explanation, keeping it factual and unemotional. I explained the HOA dispute, the missing tank, the GPS tracker, and Brenda's arrest. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Dozens of neighbors came forward with their own horror stories about Brenda's enforcement of HOA rules. One person had been fined because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Another had received a violation notice because they had parked their car in their own driveway instead of the garage for 3 consecutive days, while their garage door opener was broken. Someone else had been threatened with legal action because their rose bushes were 2 inches taller than the maximum height allowed for front yard landscaping. It became clear that I was not the only person who had suffered under Brenda's reign of terror. I was just the first one to catch her actually breaking the law. Over the next few days, I focused on getting back to normal life, though the situation kept developing in unexpected ways. On October 10th, I received a formal email from the HOA board. The other two members whose names I finally learned were Patricia Vance and Doug Morrison. They informed me that Brenda had been placed on administrative leave from her position as HOA president, pending the resolution of legal matters. They also suspended all fines related to my propane tank and invited me to a special board meeting to discuss the situation. I attended that meeting on October 12th. It was held in the community clubhouse, a beige stucco building near the neighborhood entrance that mostly hosted yoga classes and birthday parties. Patricia and Doug sat at a folding table at the front of the room, looking deeply uncomfortable. About 30 other residents were in attendance, the most people I had ever seen at an HOA meeting. Patricia, a thin woman in her 60s with gray hair and nervous energy, called the meeting to order. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "As you may be aware, there has been an incident involving our HOA president and one of our residents. We want to address this situation transparently and ensure that our community moves forward in a positive direction." Doug, a heavy-set man in his 50s who looked like he would rather be anywhere else, cleared his throat. "We have suspended all pending fines against Mr. Kellerman and are conducting a comprehensive review of recent HOA enforcement actions. If anyone believes they have been unfairly fined or targeted, please come speak with us after this meeting." A woman in the back raised her hand. "Is Brenda being removed from the board?" Patricia and Doug exchanged glances. "That is a decision that will be made once the legal process concludes," Patricia said carefully. "However, given the circumstances, we believe it is appropriate for her to step down from her leadership role." "Appropriate," someone else called out. "She stole someone's property. She should be kicked out immediately." The meeting devolved into a debate about Brenda's future with the HOA. Some people wanted her immediately removed not just from the board, but from the neighborhood entirely, though I pointed out that you cannot actually kick someone out of their own home just because they committed a crime. Others argued for a more measured approach, suggesting that everyone deserves a second chance. I raised my hand and Patricia called on me. "I appreciate the board taking this seriously," I said. "But my concern is not just about Brenda or my propane tank. My concern is that we have been operating under a system where one person had way too much power to interpret rules however they wanted and enforce them punitively. We need actual oversight and checks and balances. Otherwise, whoever replaces Brenda could do the exact same thing." There were murmurs of agreement around the room. We spent the next hour discussing potential reforms to the HOA governance structure, including requiring board votes on fines over a certain amount, creating an appeals process for violations, and implementing term limits for board positions. By the end of the meeting, Patricia and Doug had agreed to draft a proposal for revised bylaws and hold a community vote. I retrieved my propane tank from the police evidence room on October 14th. It was exactly as I had left it, still about 3/4 full of propane. I reconnected it to my grill and made a point of grilling burgers that night, posting a photo to the neighborhood Facebook group with the caption, "Reunited with my tank. Justice tastes like perfectly grilled beef." The legal process moved forward with surprising speed. Brenda was charged with theft, which in Arizona is classified as a Class 1 misdemeanor for property valued between $1,000 and $2,000 if it is a first offense. Actually, for $500, it would typically be a Class 2 misdemeanor. Her attorney tried to argue that she had acted in her capacity as HOA president, and genuinely believed she had the authority to remove code violations. But the prosecutor was not buying it. The case was assigned to a public hearing in early November. I was called to testify, which meant taking a day off work to sit in a Maricopa County courtroom. The courtroom was smaller than I expected, with maybe 40 seats for spectators. About half of them were filled with people from my neighborhood who apparently had nothing better to do than watch Brenda's legal proceedings. I took the stand and was sworn in. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 40s named Linda Hernandez, walked me through the events. I explained the HOA dispute, the disappearance of the tank, the GPS tracker, and the recovery of my property from Brenda's yard. "Mr. Kellerman, did you at any point give Miss Patterson permission to remove your propane tank?" Hernandez asked. "Absolutely not." "Did she contact you in any way before taking it?" "No. The last communication I had with her was an email about the fines I was being charged. She never said anything about removing the tank herself." Brenda's attorney, a tired-looking man named Richard Schultz, cross-examined me. He tried to establish that Brenda had acted in good faith, that she was trying to help me avoid additional fines, and that the whole thing was a misunderstanding blown out of proportion. "Is it not true, Mr. Kellerman, that you were aware you were in violation of HOA rules?" he asked. "I was aware that Miss Patterson claimed I was in violation," I said, "but I disputed that interpretation of the rules. Nowhere in the HOA bylaws does it specifically address propane tanks. But the bylaws do address utility equipment, do they not? They address utility meters and air conditioning units. A propane tank is not mentioned. So you refuse to comply with what the HOA president determined was a violation. I refuse to spend $1,000 to move a tank based on one person's interpretation of an ambiguous rule. Yes." Schultz tried a few more angles, but none of them really stuck. The GPS evidence was damning, and Brenda's own statements to the police about removing the tank for my benefit only made things worse for her defense. Brenda herself took the stand, and it was painful to watch. She insisted, repeatedly, that she had been trying to help me, that she was maintaining property values for the entire community, and that she had every right to enforce HOA rules as she saw fit. When the prosecutor asked her directly if she understood that taking someone's property without permission was theft, Brenda actually said, "It was not theft, it was code enforcement." The judge, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Marion Foster, interrupted. "Miss Patterson, did you have written permission from Mr. Kellerman to enter his property and remove his belongings?" "I did not need permission. As HOA president, I have authority to address violations." "That is not how property rights work," Judge Foster said, and I could hear the exasperation in her voice. "HOA covenants do not override basic laws regarding theft and trespassing." The hearing concluded, and we awaited the judge's decision. It came about a week later. Brenda was found guilty of theft, a Class 2 misdemeanor. She was sentenced to 6 months of probation, ordered to pay restitution of $500 to cover the value of the tank and propane, and required to complete 40 hours of community service. Additionally, Judge Foster ordered her to have no contact with me for the duration of her probation, but the consequences did not end there. The Sunset Ridge HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Brenda from her position as president. Patricia took over as interim president, and they scheduled elections for January to establish a new board. Brenda did not take this well. She filed an appeal of her criminal conviction and threatened to sue the HOA for wrongful termination from her voluntary position, which made no sense legally, but apparently she was too deep in denial to care. Meanwhile, the neighborhood underwent a kind of collective catharsis. That Facebook group became a forum for people sharing their experiences and discussing how to prevent future abuses of power. We formed a committee to rewrite the HOA bylaws with input from an actual real estate attorney who specialized in HOA law. The attorney, whose name was James Wu, volunteered his time pro bono after hearing about the situation, saying it was one of the most egregious examples of HOA overreach he had encountered in his 15-year career. The problem with many HOAs, James explained at a community meeting in late November, is that they are run by volunteers who have no training in property law, governance, or conflict resolution. They are given broad authority but no real oversight. That is a recipe for disaster. We implemented several key reforms. First, any fine over $100 required a majority vote from the board, not just the president's decision. Second, homeowners had the right to appeal any violation notice to the full board before fines were assessed. Third, we established clear definitions for common terms in the bylaws, including what constituted utility equipment, and specifying that propane tanks were exempt from screening requirements as long as they met safety codes. Fourth, we created term limits. Board members could serve a maximum of 2 consecutive 2-year terms before having to step down for at least one election cycle. The revised bylaws passed with over 90% approval from the community in a vote held in early December. It was the highest turnout for any HOA vote in the neighborhood's history. As for Brenda, she became a pariah in Sunset Ridge. People avoided her at the grocery store. She stopped attending any community events. Her husband, a quiet man named Tom who had always seemed vaguely embarrassed by his wife's behavior, was seen apologizing to neighbors on her behalf. Rumor had it they were considering selling their house and moving, though I never confirmed that. Brenda's appeal of her conviction was denied in January. The appellate court ruled that the evidence was clear, and the verdict was appropriate given the circumstances. She completed her community service by volunteering at a local food bank, which I learned about through the same neighborhood gossip network that had made her infamous. On a personal level, the whole experience changed how I viewed community involvement. Before this, I had been content to keep my head down, pay my dues, and ignore HOA politics. Now I realized that apathy was how people like Brenda gained power in the first place. I ran for the HOA board in the January elections and won a seat. So did Mike, my neighbor who had texted me during Brenda's arrest, and a woman named Jennifer who had been fined for parking violations during her garage renovation. Our first meeting as the new board was refreshingly civil. We discussed actually important things like repairing the community playground equipment and organizing a neighborhood watch program. There was no discussion of propane tanks or mailbox colors or driveway parking. Patricia, who remained on the board, remarked that it was the most productive meeting she had attended in years. I kept the GPS tracker on my propane tank, though it felt unnecessary now. It had become a kind of talisman, a reminder of how a $30 piece of technology had brought down a petty tyrant and sparked a community uprising. Friends outside the neighborhood thought the whole story was hilarious, and I told it at dinner parties to great effect. But for those of us who had lived through it, who had been harassed and fined and intimidated by someone who thought a clipboard and a title made her immune to the law, it was validation. It was proof that standing up to bullies mattered, even when the bully was someone as ridiculous as an HOA president stealing propane tanks. By March, Brenda's probation was still ongoing. I saw her once from a distance at a local coffee shop. She looked smaller somehow, diminished, like the weight of consequences had finally broken through her armor of entitlement. We did not make eye contact. There was nothing left to say. My propane tank remained in my backyard, clearly visible if you stood at the corner of Maple and turned your head at a 45-degree angle, just as Brenda had once claimed. Not a single person had complained about it since her arrest. The neighborhood moved on, stronger for the experience, with better rules and better leadership. I grilled most weekends now, often inviting neighbors over for burgers or ribs. The outdoor kitchen that had started this whole mess became a gathering place, a symbol of community rather than division. Mike liked to joke that my propane tank was a neighborhood landmark now, and in a weird way, he was right. It represented something important about property rights, the rule of law, and the limits of petty authority. The final chapter of this saga came in late April, almost 7 months after the initial theft. I received a letter in the mail from Brenda. It was handwritten, 2 pages long, and it took me several minutes to work up the nerve to read it. The letter was an apology, though a somewhat defensive one. Brenda wrote that she had been under stress, that she had taken her responsibilities as HOA president too seriously, and that she now understood she had crossed a line. She claimed she never intended to permanently keep the propane tank, that she had planned to return it once I agreed to properly screen it, and that the whole thing had spiraled beyond what she intended. I realize now that I let my authority go to my head, she wrote. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood, but I was really just imposing my will on others. I am sorry for what I did to you and for the embarrassment I brought to this community. I hope you can forgive me, though I understand if you cannot. I read the letter twice, then set it down on my kitchen table. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated by her admission of wrongdoing. Another part of me just felt tired. The whole thing had been so stupid, so unnecessary. A propane tank. This entire drama, an arrest, a criminal conviction, a community upheaval, all because someone could not handle the idea that not everyone would follow her arbitrary interpretation of rules. I never responded to the letter. Forgiveness felt premature, and I was not sure I owed her anything anyway. But I kept the letter in a drawer, a piece of evidence that even the most stubborn people can eventually realize they were wrong, even if it takes handcuffs and a criminal record to get there. Life in Sunset Ridge continued its comfortable rhythm. The Arizona summer arrived with its brutal heat, and I spent many evenings on my patio, watching the sun set behind the mountains and listening to the sound of neighbors laughing in their yards. The propane tank hummed quietly, doing its job, completely unremarkable except for the small GPS tracker still affixed to its side. I thought about removing the tracker sometimes. The battery would not last forever, and the monthly subscription fee was a minor annoyance. But I always decided to keep it, at least for a while longer. It was a reminder that justice sometimes comes from the most unexpected places. That a $30 piece of technology and a willingness to stand up for yourself could topple a tyrant, even one as mundane as an HOA president with a clipboard and a superiority complex. In June, Tom, Brenda's husband, approached me at the neighborhood pool. I had not spoken to him since the arrest, and I braced myself for confrontation. Instead, he extended his hand. "Aaron, I just wanted to say I am sorry for everything that happened," he said. "Brenda, she gets these ideas in her head and cannot let them go. I tried to tell her to leave your tank alone, but she would not listen. She never listens." I shook his hand. "I appreciate you saying that. We are putting the house up for sale next month," he continued. "Fresh start somewhere else, maybe a neighborhood without an HOA." He laughed, but it was hollow. "I am really sorry, man, for all of it." After he walked away, I felt an unexpected twinge of sympathy. Tom had not stolen anything or abused any authority. He had just been married to someone who did, and now he was paying the price for her actions. Their house went on the market in July and sold within 3 weeks. I saw the moving truck in their driveway one Saturday morning in early August. Brenda never said goodbye to anyone. She just left, and the neighborhood collectively exhaled. The new family who moved into their house was young, a couple in their early 30s with a toddler and a golden retriever. They introduced themselves at a community barbecue in September, almost exactly 1 year after the propane tank theft. Their names were Eric and Melissa, and they had never heard the story of what happened with the previous owners. Mike, ever the storyteller, launched into the tale over beers and grilled chicken. Eric and Melissa listened with growing disbelief, laughing at the absurdity while also shaking their heads at the insanity of it all. "So wait," Eric said. "She actually thought she could just take your propane tank and there would be no consequences." "Apparently," I said. "Some people think being in charge means they are above the rules everyone else has to follow. And the GPS tracker just happened to be on there. Best $30 investment I ever made." Melissa raised her beer. "To GPS trackers and karma." We all clinked our bottles together, and the conversation moved on to other topics. Normal neighborhood stuff. Sports teams, upcoming holidays, the best places to get takeout in Gilbert. The kind of easy, pleasant interactions that should define a community, not battles over propane tanks and petty enforcement of arbitrary rules. As the evening wound down and guests started heading home, I stood in my backyard, looking at the propane tank that had caused so much trouble. It was just an object, a cylinder of metal and fuel that existed to help me cook food. It had no inherent meaning or importance. But it had become a symbol of something larger, about standing up for yourself, about the importance of checks and balances on authority, about the fact that actions have consequences no matter who you are. I thought about Brenda sometimes, wondered if she had learned anything from the experience or if she was just bitter about being caught. I thought about all the neighbors who had been harassed by her enforcement campaigns, who now felt safer knowing that the bylaws had teeth, but also limits. I thought about Judge Foster's words in that courtroom, her exasperation at someone who genuinely believed HOA authority overrode basic property rights. The GPS tracker still blinked its location to my phone every hour, a small notification I had grown so used to that I barely noticed it anymore. My propane tank was exactly where it was supposed to be in my backyard, serving its purpose, bothering absolutely no one. And that, ultimately, was how it should have been from the beginning. The months turned into years, though the story of Brenda and the propane tank never quite faded from neighborhood lore. New residents heard about it during welcome meetings. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder of what happens when HOA governance goes wrong, and what can be accomplished when a community decides to hold its leaders accountable. I served 2 terms on the HOA board, the maximum allowed under the new bylaws I had helped write. During that time, we focused on practical improvements rather than petty enforcement. We repaved the community roads, updated the landscaping at the entrance, and organized quarterly social events that actually brought neighbors together. Violation notices were rare and reserved for genuine issues like homes falling into severe disrepair or safety hazards, not mailboxes being the wrong shade of black. Patricia retired from the board after 1 more term, thanking the community for the opportunity to serve and admitting that the drama with Brenda had nearly driven her to resign, before we implemented the reforms. Doug lasted one more election cycle and then stepped down, saying he preferred to spend his free time golfing rather than dealing with neighborhood politics. New people cycled through the board positions, each bringing fresh perspectives and ideas, none of them trying to become a petty dictator. The story took on new relevance in early 2027 when a local news station, doing a feature on HOA horror stories, reached out to interview me. The reporter, a young woman named Samantha Chen, had heard about the propane tank theft through a friend of a friend and thought it would make a great segment. I agreed to the interview, figuring it might help other people dealing with similar situations. The segment aired on a Thursday evening. They used the title GPS Justice, how one homeowner caught his HOA president red-handed. It was a 5-minute piece that covered the basics of the story, included my interview, and featured commentary from James Wu, the HOA attorney who had helped us rewrite our bylaws. James used the opportunity to talk about the importance of proper HOA governance and the need for homeowners to be aware of their rights. The response was overwhelming. The news station's website received hundreds of comments, mostly from people sharing their own HOA nightmares. I got emails from homeowners across Arizona and even a few from other states, asking for advice on how to reform their own communities. Some of the stories were heartbreaking, people being fined into financial ruin over minor infractions, elderly residents being harassed for perceived violations, families driven out of neighborhoods they loved because of tyrannical boards. I did my best to respond to everyone, sharing the steps we had taken in Sunset Ridge and recommending they consult with attorneys who specialized in HOA law. The news segment sparked a broader conversation in local government about HOA regulation and oversight. A state legislator even proposed a bill that would create clearer guidelines for HOA enforcement and establish an ombudsman office to handle complaints. The bill did not pass, but the fact that it was seriously discussed felt like progress. Through it all, my propane tank sat in my backyard, faithfully fueling my grill, completely oblivious to its role in a minor suburban revolution. I eventually replaced the GPS tracker's battery and renewed the subscription, telling myself it was about security, but knowing deep down it was really about sentiment. That little device had changed everything. In the summer of 2027, 3 years after the theft, I ran into Tom at a home improvement store in Mesa. He was buying paint supplies, and we almost did not recognize each other. He had lost weight and grown a beard. We made awkward small talk for a few minutes before he brought up the inevitable subject. "I saw you on the news a few months back," he said. "The story about Brenda and the propane tank." "Yeah, that happened. How is she doing?" Tom sighed. "We divorced about a year ago." She never really got over what happened, kept blaming everyone but herself. It got exhausting. "I am sorry to hear that." "Do not be. I should have left years ago, honestly. She was always like that, always had to be in control of everything. The HOA presidency just gave her a bigger stage for it." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "For what it is worth, I am glad you caught her. Maybe it will help someone else down the line, you know? Someone else dealing with the same kind of situation." We said our goodbyes, and I left the store thinking about second chances and consequences, and the long shadows that our actions cast. Brenda had paid legally for what she did, with her conviction and probation and community service. But the social consequences, the loss of her marriage and her reputation and her standing in a community she had tried to dominate, those were weights she would carry for years. I did not feel triumphant about that. I just felt relieved that it was over. As of now, in early 2028, Life in Sunset Ridge is peaceful in the way suburban neighborhoods are supposed to be peaceful. The HOA functions smoothly, addressing legitimate concerns without harassment or overreach. Property values have remained stable. People actually know their neighbors and look out for each other. The Facebook group is mostly used for sharing recommendations for plumbers and celebrating when someone spots a roadrunner in their yard. My propane tank is still there, still tracked by GPS, still doing its job without complaint. I grilled steaks last weekend for a group of neighbors, and someone inevitably brought up the story, as they always do. We laughed about it, toasted to justice and technology, and enjoyed the perfect Arizona evening. The saga of the stolen propane tank taught me several important lessons. First, that documentation matters. Without the GPS tracker and the clear evidence it provided, the situation would have been my word against Brenda's, and who knows how that would have ended. Second, that standing up to petty tyrants is worth the effort, even when it seems easier to just comply. If I had moved that tank, Brenda would have felt emboldened to continue her enforcement campaign against other neighbors, and nothing would have changed. Third, that communities are stronger when they hold their leaders accountable and implement real oversight rather than just trusting that people in power will do the right thing. But perhaps the most important lesson was simpler and more fundamental. Property rights matter. The law matters. No title or position or community role gives anyone the right to take what belongs to someone else, no matter how strongly they believe they are justified. Brenda learned that lesson the hard way, through handcuffs and a criminal record and the collapse of her reputation. It did not have to be that way. She could have listened when I challenged her interpretation of the rules. She could have called for a board vote. She could have acknowledged that maybe, just maybe, a propane tank in a fenced backyard was not the crisis she made it out to be. Instead, she chose to escalate, and that choice cost her everything. I still live in Sunset Ridge, still work from home, still grill several times a week. The outdoor kitchen that sparked this entire drama is now the site of regular neighborhood gatherings. Kids play in my yard while their parents sit on the patio, drinking beer and talking about normal things. The propane tank hums in the background, providing fuel for burgers and hot dogs and whatever else I happen to be cooking. Sometimes I check the GPS tracker app on my phone, just to see that familiar blue dot blinking exactly where it should be. It is a small reassurance in an uncertain world, a reminder that justice can prevail and that technology, used wisely, can be a powerful tool for accountability. The story of how an HOA president stole my propane tank and got arrested when a GPS alert sent police her way has become part of my identity now, for better or worse. People introduce me at parties as the propane tank guy, and I have made peace with that. If my experience helps even one person stand up to an abusive HOA, or think twice before trying to enforce rules they have no right to enforce, then the whole ridiculous ordeal was worth it. As I write this, sitting on my patio on a pleasant January evening in 2028, I can see the propane tank from my chair. It is scratched and weathered from years of use, but still functional, still reliable. The GPS tracker is still there too, a small black rectangle adhered to the side, barely visible unless you know where to look. That tracker changed my life in ways I never anticipated. It exposed corruption, sparked reform, brought a community together, and proved that even the smallest act of preparation can have enormous consequences. $30 and 5 minutes of setup time resulted in a criminal conviction, a divorce, a neighborhood transformation, and a news story that reached thousands of people. Not bad for a piece of technology designed to track lost luggage. The sun is setting now, painting the Arizona sky in shades of orange and purple. Tomorrow, I will probably grill chicken for dinner. Next week, we have another HOA board meeting, though my term is long over and I attend now just as an interested resident. Life continues its steady rhythm, boring in the best possible way, and my propane tank, the unlikely hero of this entire story, will be right where it has always been. In my backyard, behind my fence, minding its own business, exactly as it should be.